Another library that I find very useful is the HTTP status codes, which sets up the status codes as constants. So instead of hard coding, we will import the constants from the library and then apply them in our responses. Now, that is my personal preference, so technically you don't have to do it. So if you still prefer just hard coding here, these number values, you can definitely do so. But since I'm going to add it to our application, therefore I'll go over the details. And effectively, in my opinion, it provides more consistency. In the long run, I have found that there's less bugs and it's also easier to read and manage the application. If you want to find out more info, here's the link. And again, the main idea is following, where essentially you install library, yep, that is clear, and then you import the constants. So for example, for 201, we would get created and then we would set it up in response. So again, that way I don't need to remember the status codes and it's easier for me to read when I'm looking at my code. I right away understand what the response is doing. Again, my preference, you don't have to do it, but in my case, I will install it. So we start over here. We get the install command, which is also in the README. Then copy and paste. We install library. And then I want to set it up in two places. I want to set up in the auth controller as well as the error handler. And then at the very end, we'll set up default error, which at the moment might seem like a useless thing. But since we'll be setting up Mongoose errors in the following videos, we might as well knock it out right now. So let me go back and start up the server. And then again, we're looking for the status codes import from the library. And then we're looking for the constant. So where we have the response, we go with status. And then, for example, for 200, we go with status code. That's the import. And then OK. And again, you can read all the constants over here and which status code they reference. So let me go back, looking for auth controller. And I'm going to go with import. I'm looking for status codes from, and then, of course, the library, the HTTP status codes. And then instead of 201, I'm going to go here with status codes, status, and then codes, and then dot. Okay, let's save that. And then once we have this in place, now let me go to my error handler. And I want to do the same thing, where essentially I'll speed this up a little bit, where I'll copy the import here. And then, like I said, instead of just sending the response in this way, I'll set up the default error response. Essentially an object with two properties, a status code property as well as the message. And again, like I said before, at the moment, it might seem like a useless thing. But in a few videos, when we add more code, you'll see why we're doing that. So let's start over here by creating the object. So default and error. If you want to add response, you can definitely do so in my case. I'm just going to go with default error. Now I'll still console log the error. That still stays the same. And then, like I said, there's going to be two properties, status code. And for the time being, I'm just going to go with status codes dot, and then 4500, which is going to be our default error. What you're looking for is internal and then server error. And notice how they right away nicely suggest the constants for you. So that's the 500 one. And as far as the message, let's set up the property first. So let's say here message, and that will be equal to a string, something went wrong, try again later. And now where I have the response, instead of setting this up as 500, I'm going to go with default error. That's the object, that, and then the status code. And eventually we'll do the same thing over here, where message will be equal to a default error and message. But while we're still setting up the Mongoose errors, I actually want to send back the full response because it's going to be easier to manage that instead of the console. So that way we can right away get the full response in the Postman, and I can clearly show you which properties we're looking for. So yes, eventually this will be equal to default error and then dot message. But for time being, we'll still be sending back the error that we're getting as the first argument.